Well, we're delighted to be joined by one of football journalism's greatest minds in Henry Winter, who's coming to us live from Germany where he's at the Euros. Henry, how are you enjoying the tournament?
Well, I've been mainly watching England, so I mean, look, they have a fabulous collection of players, really good bunch of individuals, but they haven't clicked so far. So, touch wood, when they come against the Swiss, who are going to be the best team they'll have faced so far, they will click. But England has certainly got the players.
What's it like covering the tournaments like the Euros or the World Cups, which obviously come around periodically, compared to the day-to-day run-of-the-mill, if you want to call it, domestic football season?
I mean, this is my 15th tournament covering England, and it's partly circus. I think the media's changed, the media landscape's changed. There isn't a tabloid war, circulation war, sort of chewing up big names like Terry Venables. And I mean, I can remember it was in Oslo in '95 in one of those interminable warm-up matches before the Euros, and part of the media had it in for Terry Venables. And in fact, it was Gareth Southgate's first time on the England bench, first trip abroad with England. And one of the back pages mocked Terry up with a noose around his head, around his neck. That doesn't happen anymore. I mean, what's happened on this trip is that it's actually quite grown up. The debate has been all about the football, the imbalance on the left, too many number 10s. Should they have bought Luke Shaw, an understudy, left-footed understudy for Luke Shaw? So it's actually been quite a grown-up debate, which makes me slightly amused when one or two of the players have been suggesting that they've been battered. Absolutely nothing compared to what Beckham and Rooney and going back before that, they had to endure. So no, it's good. They're really nice. They're a really good bunch of players. Good to deal with.
Henry, do you think some of that's been maybe heightened by, of course, the sort of famous sort of Lineker Shearer? They seem to have been a little bit stronger in some of their opinions for different reasons, I'm sure. But do you think the players are so aware of that? Is that something that you can feel from the inside? Has that affected them?
There's a rhythm to the criticism. So the game finishes, they do the flash interviews, the manager and the man of the match, and then the players go through the mix zone. And the questions there, certainly from the print, the sort of the harder-nosed journalistic sides, are fairly critical when Southgate comes in. We're not cheerleaders. We say it as we see it, echoing the fans. And so there's a critical element to those press conferences. And then, of course, sort of social media feeds on that. Everyone's got their own platform on social media. Everyone lets rip. Then the podcasters come in. And when you've got someone like Gary Lineker and Alan Shearer, those two in particular, who know what it's like to play for England in intense competitions where the criticism going into those competitions was 10 times the ferocity of what it is now in terms of Lineker with Italia 90 and Shearer with Euro 96, particularly on the back of the dentist chair. So they know what it's like to walk through the storm. They also know what it's like to play up front and in terms of their critique of Harry Kane. I actually thought it was very measured. I just thought the one mistake that Lineker made was to use a foul word, which kind of lowered the debate and actually took away from a lot of intelligent. You guys know Lineker. I mean, he's a very good observer of the game. He's a brilliant presenter, but he's also a very good pundit. So that got slightly lost. But, in the great history of England tournament circuses, if one word is the stumbling block, then I don't actually think that's the worst thing that's happened.
Does that become more of a challenge now with the modern player, Henry, where you say when obviously Gareth Southgate comes in to do his press conference, you guys are able to let rip, but also players, managers, coaches, they're kind of airbrushed to within an inch of their lives on the PR of all of this, how to answer all types of questions. So getting that authenticity of their actual opinions is more difficult now. I mean, that's obviously the skill of a journalist, but also they've developed skills to be able to parry off those questions that are trickier.
Well, I think one of the reasons why you two have such good reputation from our side of the fence, and Gary, having been in your press conferences, is that word authenticity. There isn't that sort of media airbrushing. I don't really think there is necessarily so much. That's a slight myth. I know they go through the academy system and they get taught how to do things. But actually, when you look at a lot of these young players and this generation in particular, out with football, they've got quite a conscience. They're quite activist minded. I mean, thinking of my own kids, but also thinking of the sort of Rashford, Sterling generation. Jude Bellingham will walk into a press conference and you can almost see one or two of the PR people grimacing because he is so honest. He absolutely has called us out a couple of times. It's actually been quite fun because I like players who've got an edge who will give it back. If I criticise a player, criticised Rooney once, and he came back at me actually on social media. That is quite a thing when you've got all Rooney's army of supporters coming over the hill, putting you in your place. So that was a fun week on social media. But I think with social media is really important because they use it as a platform to hit back. Bellingham quite rightly took issue with criticism of his gesture, the cojones gesture, 14 hours before the UEFA, actually sort of made any comment on it. I like that. I really like this generation. They're not media airbrushed. They do come out and say it as it is. And you look at Rashford particularly, and I got not close to him because you don't really get close to players, but did a few pieces with him, rang him at home, or he was on his mobile at home during the whole child food poverty campaign. There wasn't any airbrushing of what Marcus Rashford was saying about the government, about the Prime Minister. He was absolutely going for them, actually in a very measured, civilised way, bringing in Mel, his mother, just to sort of make the point about what he'd gone through and what she'd gone through, sacrificing, working so hard, doing 3 jobs to feed the 3 kids. And yeah, and I like that. It was like a player unplugged. And I really respect, of all the generations I've worked with, look, they're all different. You can't compare generations. But I really like this generation because they're very honest. They're authentic, to use your word. So, they come out and they speak their mind. And actually, I think they probably get a better reception from the media. And I think we're probably more careful about their quotes. Certainly in what I'll call the mainstream media, 1 or 2 things have been said and actually have been toned down because you think, well, actually, that's not going to help that player with his club or with the team he's about to play next because he's been a little bit, not arrogant, but, saying something about the next team. You think, oof. I could get a cheap headline out of that, but actually it won't serve him well. And because we like this generation of players, they're no dickheads, to use the All Black words in the, in this England squad. There was one who's not been seen since.
I was going to ask that, Henry, because as you were saying that, it kind of resonated with me. I've always tried to, when I'm giving interviews as a manager after games, and there's the emotions of, if you do things too quickly, sometimes you're very emotive and you can say the wrong things. But I've always felt, rather than be bland, I've always felt as though you want to sometimes have a bit of fun in some of those interviews. You want to sometimes say what you want to say. Of course, some journalists will very quickly use that against you. And so therefore you can understand why people toe the party line a little bit. But how would you shape that? You've said that sometimes you could get a cheap headline. But is the quality of that article more important to you than trying to get a quick win? Is that something you've been conscious of?
Totally. I mean, it's just the way I was brought up as an individual, let alone as a journalist. I think trust is so important in this profession. But I've been very fortunate. The newspapers that I work with, 8 years at the Independent, 21 at the Telegraph, and then 8 at the Times, and now sort of heading off on my own. The headlines have never been an issue, and if there have been, it has been an issue. And there was one once on an interview with Virgil van Dijk. The piece went live on the Telegraph or the Times website at 5:00 on a Friday evening. Within 4 or 5 minutes, there'd been communication from Liverpool to me, communication from me to the office, and the headline was changed because the headline didn't really reflect what he was saying. I could see where the desk was slightly going with it, but it was wrong and it was changed, and literally changed within 5 minutes. And that's why digital's very important. But social media, in a strange way, has, I mentioned that Rooney thing. If we get something wrong on social media, or we get something wrong that then gets published on social media, we get called out. There is a very swift accountability for us. And remember, a lot of these players, particularly in the sort of the social world that we live in, they tend to follow players as much as they do clubs. They're very loyal to players. I mean, I've got the Ballon d'Or vote, the English Ballon d'Or vote, and I can tell you the Messi Ronaldo debate, whichever one you vote for, even if it's a clear winner for either side, wow, that is you get. I mean, the social media response, and all the judges will tell you that. But authenticity is key, and you guys have got that. And when I look at Gary, in terms of your career, why you've got such a respected voice, and I say that I don't know you particularly well, but having been in your press conferences and obviously covered your career as a player and as a manager, you come in with this amazing authenticity, which I think sometimes managers forget. Particularly if they're thinking of doing a bit of media work or thinking of going into management or continuing in management. For us, for a journalist who hasn't played the game or played it at a very modest level, you will always be 1-0 up because you played for 4 clubs in the Premier League, because you played for 4 or 5 clubs in the EFL. You've experienced it at all levels. And actually, that gives you even more resonance than someone who just played in the Premier League or just played in the EFL, because you can actually put... you played at Everton. I don't think you were in the cup final squad, but you were there. So look, you played in Europe. You've got all these experiences, and that gives you even more authenticity. So I will absorb all that into account when I'm listening to you, and I think, right, there are a lot of voices out there, a lot of opinions from managers, but actually when Gary speaks, he comes from a background of, you speak from the dressing room, not just simply at the elite level, but at the EFL level, and that gives you even more resonance and authenticity.
We've been in a few non-elite dressing rooms, Henry, along the way. Obviously, when you've been to Carlisle a few times, you realise that there are levels to dressing rooms, I suppose. And I suppose that's part of it, isn't it? You develop that relationship with somebody who is authentic. It's a big part of our game. We have to build relationships with players. Sometimes it's short term. Other times you're with them for years. Is it the same for you guys? Like, is that something you have to work on, or is it just something that naturally comes, in the job? Not saying that it's a skill that you necessarily have to get, but is that part of the trait of a good journalist, that they build those relationships?
I think there are 2 important things to learn in life when you're working out in life: work hard and be nice to people. And I think that applies with all professions. I look at some of the players who actually don't get much criticism, partly because they've always been nice to the players. Beckham was a fantastic player. Manchester United, England, just the way he came back from, and I was there in Saint Etienne, and the abuse that he got and the effigies, and you thought, is he going to come back from this? And then he obviously went over to America, joined the Spice Girls on tour, spent time with Victoria, and he was basically escaping. And then within 18 months, he was captain. Peter Taylor made him captain of England in Turin. And during that period, when he reported for England duty or on Manchester United, Beckham would come out and talk down to earth. Huge credit to his parents and the coaches at Manchester United, but also huge credit to him. And that's one of the reasons why Beckham has always had the support of the England media, even when the country was turning against him. Okay, there were 1 or 2 horrible headlines that he had to deal with post Saint Etienne. But yeah, I mean, work hard and be nice to people. It's not bad, and that sums up David Beckham, and it sums up a lot of the players. Certainly in this England squad, they work hard. And what's been fascinating is getting to know. I come from a fairly privileged background, but actually spending time with a lot of the players. Whether they're out just talking to them, interviews, having a coffee with them, or going on community hospital visits with them, actually getting to know what they've been through. So like Trent Alexander-Arnold, the work he does in the community in Liverpool. Rashford's not here, Sterling's not here, but you look at the journey that they went on early in their career, early in their life, just to sort of make their way. And I think Southgate's been huge on that. Southgate told the players to tell the journalists, to tell the fans, we don't just turn up. We haven't all just rolled out of an academy and everything's been easy. We've made sacrifices. We've known what it's like. I mean, Gary, when you had that knee injury, again, that was brutal at the time. But that experience, I'm sure, makes you an even better manager for when you're sort of dealing with players who've had injuries. So even the sort of dark moments in life can provide light, later on in terms of your career.
I think that, I think you're absolutely spot on, Henry. I think that's one thing I've always felt, that no matter what industry you're in, you could be a business owner, you could be a football manager, you could be a journalist, you could be whatever career you're in. It's about people, isn't it? 99% of it is about people and how you treat them and how you try and listen and understand what makes them tick. I'm thinking back to sort of early in my playing career. And I remember going on a pre-season tour, and when I was at Everton and sitting and having a beer with Dave Prentice, who I think was a Liverpool Echo at the time.
Preno, yeah.
Yeah, and for having honestly, ended up drinking about 5 Zambucas, and Dave was with us. And I thought, and when I look back on that, I thought, I wonder if anyone actually does that anymore, whether you get that closeness and that relationship. Are you still afforded those off-the-cuff chats with England players to get to know them away from the microphone, away from the print, or is that probably less? And how important is that for someone like you to feel the player and what makes them tick?
Yeah, I mean, I like spending time with players because I'm a fan of football, and I've learned one thing very early on: talk to footballers about football. If you talk to me about journalism, I might be able to give you sort of vaguely detailed answer. Same with football. Ross Barkley, if you talk to him. Actually, Ross has actually got quite a lot of hinterland to him. But I mean, Ross, if you talk to him about football, he just gives amazing technical, tactical insight on Ronaldinho and, Pirlo, whichever the players that you ask him about. Jordan Pickford, he's brilliant if you talk to him about goalkeepers. What I've found in the modern world is that actually players need us less in terms of they've got their own platforms, they look at social media. But then sometimes when they've got a big campaign going on, like Marcus, he needed to get the message through to Downing Street. Absolutely, he used me, well, not used, but he got the message through to Boris Johnson because I knew people around Boris Johnson. I was talking to people at Downing Street and I was going, don't take on this guy because he's got a huge social media following and he's got a cause and he's on the right side of history. And they were a little bit dismissive. The politicians thinking, well, he's just a footballer. And I said, there's only going to be one winner in this, and that's Rashford. And Rashford, I think, just used the sort of the more mainstream media. But social media, I mean, it's always said that journalism is the first draft of history. But actually, I think now social media has become it. And the players will look at that. And I would say, I mean, I'm not working for a newspaper at the moment, but I would say probably 40% of the stories that go on the sports pages, particularly the football pages of newspapers, are derived from social media, whether it's a backlash against the player, whether it's something the players themselves have said. So if I'm a manager, the first thing I talk to a player about when it comes to the media and media relations is just be careful on social media. I mean, I've gone in and talked to academies and they said, look, you're not particularly interested in a sort of, middle-aged posh twat from London sort of coming and talking to you about media relations. But seriously, there's nothing between you and my back page if you've tweeted something daft, and then you'll get an FA fine that might affect your career and whatever. So I think social media is really the area now that players look at. And actually, probably it's one thing I've benefited from because I got onto Twitter early and I've got quite a few followers, and people look at that and they think, oh, well, he can't be a complete old fart. And sometimes they use that. I mean, I will get clubs and I will get players saying, listen, I've got this event coming up or whatever. Can you sort of plug it? So you get that relationship there. But coming back to your essential question, I don't think I'll be going having 6 Sambucas with Jude Bellingham anytime soon because I don't think Jude would have that in his career, and I don't drink anyway. Actually, I'm a rare journalist who doesn't drink.
A smoothie.
Yeah, it's a smoothie. Absolutely, yeah, it would be a smoothie. But that relationship is still there. But the most important thing is the respect is still there.
I suppose, Henry, what you talk about there is there's 2 things out there. There's the in-your-face, low scrutiny, non-contextual ability on social media now to just post whatever you want. And that works for fans, it works for people in the game, working around the game, or even for players. Like they don't need a channel. You have your own channel, you have your own way of broadcasting nowadays. And sometimes at the altar of get it out first and get it out fast, that sometimes that ability to have those deeper, more contextual pieces is probably falling by the wayside. It used to be it's going to be tomorrow's fish and chip paper, but it's even moving faster than that now, isn't it? It's kind of in half an hour there'll be another story, there'll be another reel coming around. How do you have to evolve now in your kind of journalism journey as such to be able to cope with that? We have to in our game as the game changes and technology changes, but similarly, it must be a challenge for you guys as well.
But actually, it's been a good challenge. And actually, social media, in a strange way, has made our life easier. Because if you look at social media and you think, well, 90% of it is madness, where is the truth in it? Actually, if it's a Liverpool story, I'll look at Paul Joyce, my old colleague at the Times. When he posts something on social media, it is absolute gospel. And then you get all the aggregators and you get the sort of, a lot of the fans podcasts, they react to that. But they know because Paul Joyce would not post anything unless it was 100% correct. And it's like Klopp leaves or Van Dijk signs a new contract. And his tweets are like about 5-6 words long. And yet they're straight to the point and everyone goes, so actually, you look at, say like Matt Law at the Telegraph or Mike McGrath at the Telegraph, if they tweet something about the clubs they're associated with, whether Chelsea or in Mike's case, some of the Midlands clubs, that John Percy, another one, that it's 100% correct. So in a strange way, in the whole madness of Twitter, the fact that you actually have got some people that you can trust, and a lot of them tend to be the mainstream journalists, has actually in a strange way, well, not a strange way, it's definitely helped our standing, certainly amongst fans.
I'm good mates with Person. You've given far too much credit there, Henry. Definitely.
Hey, you need to get him marathon running.
I know. But would you take some of those bits off social media and then add more detail and more context to that? Or how would some of the origins of some of your stories start? Give us a little flavour of, how would a story start for you, and how would you sort of build that up in terms of your process?
I mean, the better story getters out there are people like Perce, who and when he tweets something on Forest or any of the Midlands clubs, it's sort of 100% genuine. The sort of news stories I tend to generate is because of sort of connections and maybe trust with players, with managers. So take Ten Hag. I did sort of Ten Hag's main interview and spent time with him talking about his background. We talked about Dutch colonial history. I mean, it was quite a wide-ranging conversation, as well as about Mason Greenwood. Obviously, the Mason Greenwood quotes then get lifted and scattered everywhere, and that's fine as long as they're fairly reflective, which unfortunately they weren't in one case. And I actually contacted Manchester United that night and said, listen, there's one very prominent social media site which has misquoted Ten Hag on Greenwood. And so we sort of had to address that. That's always an issue there. But so it tends to be those things. And again, you don't necessarily go for the headline. I mean, my view is that if I'm doing a 3,000 word interview with Eric Ten Hag, or who did I see recently, Eric Dyer, or in the past sort of few months, Ten Hag was a year ago. You think, well, if they're really interesting bits, the news lines, as some people will put them and want to splash them on the back page, as long as it's in the body of the copy, I can have a softer intro talking about the setting, the mood of the individual, maybe something quirkier about them. I just expect people to read the whole piece. And I also want to be fair to them. I don't want people to think, well, it's a 3,000 word piece, but it's got an explosive headline on it. I don't think actually that helps the reading of the piece, but that's just a personal thing. But that's because I've been doing this for 35 years, and I'm not necessarily wanting to have a sort of clickbaity headline. I have to say personally, I've deliberately moved against clickbait, as have a lot of other journalists.
Is that trickier to do now? Because back in the day, as you said earlier, like the desk would create the headline, and then maybe you'd have to get a little bit of better tone to whatever that might be.
I've never had that in 38. When my first match report was 85, 86, just out of uni. Never ever had that. Partly because of the people I work for. Partly I wouldn't do it because I said you're cheating your readers. You're also ruining. What reputation? I don't know what reputation I've got, but I think probably most people in the industry trust me. So No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't do that. I would absolutely get them. And in the digital world, as in Virgil van Dijk, you can change headlines very, very quickly if you don't feel it reflects the piece.
Just coming off the back of the Euros, then, Henry, for you, let's say we're at the start of a Premier League season. I've read a lot about your sort of, you can get by on 4 or 5 hours sleep. You're going to watch, I would imagine you're going to watch hundreds of games, doing hundreds of articles. How challenging is a season for someone like you? And give us a flavour of what that workload is like and how you sort of cope with that.
There's no challenge, and I wouldn't consider it a workload. I would consider it a privilege. I'd be stuck in shelves in Harrods if I wasn't doing this. This has just been an absolute dream to spend time with people like you, to cover your career, to understand the journey that you've been on as individuals as well as footballers. I find it absolutely fascinating. I mean, probably what's the most talked about things in the country: politics, the weather, the royal family, and football. And to cover one of those, and also the proliferation of platforms. So we're talking on screens here. That wouldn't have been possible. I mean, COVID, for all its horrendous issues, and how well football clubs, Gary, you would have been involved in this, and players as well, how well football came out of COVID in terms of standing up for the community, little things like players ringing up elderly season ticket holders who might be living on their own or had a loved one who'd passed away in a hospice because the leadership of this country just made horrendous decisions. The fact is that the football did so well, but obviously the whole Zoom concept, StreamYard concept came in, and so you could communicate much more quickly with people. So I do TV, radio. I'm a bit of a tart. My answer phone says yes, particularly at the moment. But I just enjoy it. I enjoy talking about football. I look at my friends who, from school and university, and they've all got really grown-up jobs. And if we go off for a drink, I don't say one of them's a really good musician, so I talk to him a little bit about that. But, some of them have got really important jobs, and all they want to do is talk about what's Bellingham like. Is he one of the best you've ever seen? Who's better, Messi or Ronaldo? All these great football debates, and I think I actually get paid for this. So I've never seen it as a job. But coffee's important. Clean driving license is important, and this whole 4 or 5 hours of sleep bit, that's not difficult. You guys have busy working lives. I love I got brought up by a Japanese lady when I was younger, and the Japanese culture is absolutely brilliant because if you have 10 minutes of sleep at your desk, your boss doesn't go, "Oh, that's being lazy." They then assume that your productivity for the remaining 50 minutes of the hour will be increased. So I'm an expert at falling asleep in service stations, and then going on to the next match. But it's going to matches. That's the whole adrenaline, just sitting there, because it's all unscripted drama. You never know what's going to happen. I mean, who could have predicted? Well, you might have predicted because Bellingham was brilliant, but no one could have predicted. I mean, I was just about to write a scathing piece, excoriating Gareth Southgate and some of the England players, and then Bellingham does that. Players write the scripts, players write the headlines, and it's fantastic to react to that. There's nothing better than being in Istanbul in 2005 at half-time with a Liverpool fan sort of saying, "Oh, don't give up. Don't write bad of them. That something will happen." I'm going 3-0 down against AC Milan with Maldini and Shevchenko and the players they've got out there, and Ancelotti in the dugout, no chance. And then you see the comeback. What a privilege it is to write a piece on that. 99, Nou Camp, Barcelona, Manchester United. My first edition was all about Ferguson being tactically inept. And then with just a little bit on the top saying, in a dramatic late turnaround, Manchester United, turned Teutonic supremacy on its head and won the Champions League, followed by a 950-word dissection of Ferguson playing three wingers or whatever. So anyway, and then the start of the next season, Ferguson said, "I saw your first edition," because all the first editions got kindly delivered to the hotel that Manchester United were staying in. I think fortunately most of them are too hungover to read it. But anyway, so I just love that. I love unscripted drama. So much of life is about sort of set plays and you see people going off and doing really important jobs, but it's like a 9 to 5 element or a set piece element. I love the unpredictability of this job. It's a circus at times, but it's a brilliant circus.
Can you get a hairdryer over the telephone, Henry? That's the question I'm thinking. As soon as you said that.
When I've had the hairdryer in person from Ferguson, completely my fault. I started a question by mentioning Liverpool, and that was just I got the deserved hairdryer. But you know what an amazing person Ferguson is. I mean, I'm writing a book at the moment, and I'm looking back at some of the interviews I've done. I've interviewed 1,400, 1,500 people in football, and Sir Alex is absolutely the top 5, top 3, probably top 1. And I remember walking out of his office in Carrington after about 45 minutes with him. Just had no idea how I got out of Carrington, no idea even if I got into the right car or how I drove home, because my mind was full of all the thoughts that he'd evoked, that he'd raised, that he'd articulated and analysed. And then just that sheer privilege of spending time, just me and him, for 40 minutes in his company, and just one education. And the other thing about Ferguson is that he speaks like JFK, speed and accuracy and beautiful grammar. And you look at it, and probably on an hour's tape with Alex Ferguson, probably about 5,500 words, which is huge. And then probably about 5,300 of those is usable. His grammar is beautiful. It's like he takes care, not simply about what he's saying, but the way he says it. And you just sit there and I go, my brother's one of the most famous scholars in the country, and he doesn't speak with such beauty. I mean, he does, but just not with the amazing thing that Ferguson does. And then you talk to Ferguson and you go, right, okay, football, that's interesting. Oh, we'll talk about wine, we'll talk about art, we'll talk about the museum that I remember he said to me once, he said, are you coming up to, I think, Manchester United are playing either Celtic or Rangers, but anyway, up in Glasgow. And he was a trustee of about 3 new museums up there. And it was just, it's just a privilege. I keep coming back to that word. It is a privilege to cover these remarkable people.
And there are so many of them in the game, aren't there? Like, we've spent time with so many players where you realise that their life is far more than just what the public see on a pitch on a Saturday for 90 minutes. Some of them have really enriched lives doing lots of very, very interesting things. There's probably a little bit of a lazy opinion that footballers are a certain kind of way. And as you say there, some of them can talk to you about history or business. We were speaking with Matt Smith yesterday, he's got a master's degree in business. He's got a whole other side to his life that people don't really realize. And you're privileged to get to speak to a lot of those people and even write some of the books with them.
Yeah, I'm doing one with, I don't know when this is coming out, but I'm doing one with Duncan Ferguson at the moment, who Gary will know from his time at Everton. And I have to say, that is more than an education.
Colourful. He's going to be talking a lot about the Continental Club on a Wednesday night in Liverpool, I'm sure.
The lawyers are going to have fun.
Talking about things away from sort of the job, Henry, it's quite interesting that we had a couple more people on here. We might be able to get a decent 5-a-side team because I can play anywhere across the back. Dave fancies himself as a creative number 10, which I've seen him train a few times. And I believe that you have been known to lead the line as a striker.
Honestly, this is a complete myth. This, you need to check your sources. And one thing I learned very early on, don't ever bring yourself into a conversation about football with footballers, because it is a little bit like going up against Frank Sinatra on karaoke. Just don't, because it won't end well. So no, I know my place, and it just, everyone's passionate about football, everyone's played it at some level, but actually it enhances my admiration of footballers even more. And one of the joys of tournaments is actually spending a little bit of time watching the training and watching training close up. And even though you only get about 15-20 minutes there, you get longer to watch the goalkeepers. Just actually watching that technique close up is just fascinating, because sometimes we're a little bit dismissive of players' technique, but when you see a Rondo, obviously, and you just see the speed of the passing, and you just look at a Mainu or Wharton, these kids who just stepped into the squad, they're absolutely fearless. They're laying the ball off first time, or they're doing two touch, and you just go, wow. And then you go and watch the goalkeepers, and you look at Aaron Ramsdale. He can't get in the first team at Arsenal, and you just see some of the saves that he is pulling off when Tom Heaton or Martin Margerson are absolutely belting half volleys at him, throwing himself around. That application, that dedication, and that ability as well. Dean Henderson as well. Obviously, Jordan Pickford is England's number one for a reason. But actually, listening to Jordan Pickford, I have to say my vocabulary has slightly expanded. I've got a little bit of Sunderland rhyming slang in there now. And, just listening to them, again, it's an absolute privilege just to see professionals at work close up and get to know a little bit more about how they play the game. And also, with some of them, how they see the world. I mean, Wayne Rooney, extraordinary things you do in life. I went around Auschwitz with Wayne Rooney and spoke to him there. And the questions that he asked of the guy, because England were based near Auschwitz in Euro 2012 when they were in Poland. It was about half an hour away. And Rooney was very keen to go, and Roy Hodgson said, yeah, it would be a good idea. And 6 or 7 of the players went, those who weren't going to be playing in the first game against France, because obviously the sports scientists and Gary Neville weren't particularly approving of it. But Rooney, just the questions he asked, and he sort of, I thought Rooney was a slightly one-dimensional individual, but actually just listening to ask really sentient questions to the guide about how could the SS officer, the doctor, stand, I think it was SS, I think he was Philo, his name was, stand on the platform with all these carriages of just these poor individuals, these poor souls, almost at death's door anyway, but literally at death's door as the carriages opened and they fell out. These horse wagons from all over Europe. Rooney asked the sort of guide who was showing us around, who was, I think, either the son or the grandson of someone who'd actually passed away there, and the rest of the family had sort of stayed on almost as homage, and asked the guide what was the mindset of this SS officer who stood there destroying families and then walked literally 400 yards away and went through his nice rose garden, and his wife was making cakes and the kids were back from school playing around, and he sat down at the piano and played some Mozart and then played with the kids. What was the mindset? And I thought, God, what a really intelligent, thoughtful question. So again, those sort of moments just give you an indication of the depth of footballers. Whenever I interview a footballer, I go in with the view that there's no such thing as a boring interviewee, just bad questions. And I've had a couple of bad interviews down the years and come away and people said, oh, what was up? I'll tell you, Lauren at Arsenal, this is 20 years back, I really struggled in the interview, got absolutely nothing out of him. And every other journalist took the piss out of me, and they still do. Say, he's one of the best interviews out there. Your questions must have been so poor. So again, life skill, preparation, do it right.
How critical of you... Sorry, Dave. Yeah, how critical are you, Henry, of your own work? Are you quite balanced in terms of your perspective, or are you quite self-critical when you do articles? How do you sort of deal with your own... how do you evaluate your own work, I suppose? Every
Friday evening at about sort of 5-6 o'clock, I just have a mental audit in my head, and I go through the pieces that I've done during the week. It's slightly different now that I'm sort of set off on my own, but I'm still sort of producing similar amounts of pieces on a daily basis. And I look at them and I compare how sort of rivals, other journalists, their friends, have done it. I thought, oh God, that was a better intro than mine. My payoff should have been my first paragraph. I missed the point on that. I do go on a lot of fans' forums immediately after matches just to see that I'm not missing an important point about a player, about a match, about a manager's decision, whether I'm being too not lenient on the referee, but should be making more of the sort of, just reflecting the response and the concerns of the people who really know, which is mainly the fans. Often players and managers, particularly players, will react on social media afterwards, go and have a look at that, just to make sure that I'm sort of covering all the bases. But absolutely, I'm incredibly critical. I went for about 4 or 5 years without without winning an award. And I thought, just you absolutely got to raise your game. I mean, we're competitive individuals. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still think I'm starting out, and I always think it's quite hilarious when I get asked into journalism schools to talk to young journalists. I'm going, I might go in and pick their brains because of their ability with technology, their fresh approach, the enthusiasm that they've got. Every day's a learning day.
And that's the joy of it, isn't it? You can always keep developing. The game allows you to do that, and the journalism game, or whatever we do in sport, it gives you that great opportunity to keep evolving and keep developing. So where do you see it going to next, Henry? Do you see
The industry? I mean, podcasts are huge. Podcasts slightly caught me by surprise. Podcasts have been absolutely fantastic. And I mean, in a way, you could argue they're a threat to radio, because people are getting in the car and listening to podcasts, or going out and run, or doing Peloton. They're doing it with podcasts on. The financial element of podcasts, absolutely lucrative for the elite 1%, probably the Linekers and the Nevilles. They'll be doing well out of it, and rightly, because their product is horrible word product, but what they do, their conversations, the detail is, the production values are fantastic. I see more journalists setting up on their own. I mean, I quite like it because you have that control. There's a sort of basically a do-it-your-own platform that's come over from America, and a lot of the baseball writers left newspapers and set up on their own, and it's coming in over here. You've got that individual, the Substack approach, the individual subscription service, and you build up your own community, which I quite like. But it probably works for me, sort of in my 4th decade of doing this. Newspapers are having to go behind paywalls. The financial model is an issue. But you look at the quality in the Times and the Telegraph and the Guardian and the Independent and the Mail, and even you look at the tabloids. The service that they give for the cost is actually outstanding, given the sort of, journalists aren't necessarily cheap to run in terms of running costs and salary, and yet you get fantastic returns. So I think that the industry generally is in quite a good place, because there's so many platforms. But as a journalist, you've got to be aware that you do television, that you do radio, that you do social media. I mean, I don't do much Instagram because I don't quite understand the sort of journalistic element for that. But absolutely, in terms of, radio. I love doing radio. I just all those elements, and I love social media at matches, because you've got that immediacy and little videos that you can take of people coming in, because we do have that sort of access. Is huge as well. Obviously, you respect the rights holders. You would never show anything during the match, but fans coming in and out of grounds, particularly with England fans, because of the noise they're making at the moment, is huge. So, yeah, I consider the industry generally in a good place in terms of the number of platforms. The issue will be how you monetize those platforms. I mean, people say, "Oh, you've got 1 million followers on on Twitter." I don't make any money out of Twitter. Apparently, you can, and maybe I should think about that. But because of the ad revenue. But I don't know. I get, I like doing books as well. I've got 2 books on the go at the moment. I love that. I just love the broad range. Maybe it's because I'm not particularly good at one thing, and I've sort of spread my. I'm a sort of digital decathlete. I've spread myself around a bit. But again, it's that extra. If you're waiting at an airport, you can spend an hour just working on a book. You can use your time like that. I quite like those different challenges.
I suppose there's an element, isn't there, with some of the sort of long form media, the podcasting. You can actually get into. This is what we're keen on. You can actually get into that conversation. You can actually maybe spend a little bit more time understanding how that person ticks, or how that person works. So, like you said before, how players are perceived, because actually when you spend these times speaking to players and unearthing a little bit about what they're about, you really can learn something new. Is that something you'd like to do more of, coming away from something like the Times, expanding sort of, the way that you work, perhaps?
I mean, it's interesting for what you guys are doing, because you've got that trust and because you've got the connections. Footballers will come in and they'll talk to you and they will open up, and that's what punters, the listeners want. They want that authenticity, and you if you talk to a famous player that you've played with or you've managed, they will trust you and they will open up to you. And it's interesting, you've got that dynamic, the two of you. But Gary, with your managerial head on, if some of your former players, I bet they will probably open up to you even more, because you've had that relationship with them and you probably supported them through difficult moments in their career, whether selection, whether injuries, whether off the field issues. Managers now are just such important individuals. I know everyone talks about, well, the most important thing is recruitment, and I get that, but actually man management and the skills that you've got, and it's one of the reasons why Ferguson, just his books on leadership, his talks at Harvard, is just so revered, is because the skills that you've got in particular, Gary, they're so applicable to so many walks of life. You could go in and give a talk to business leaders on how to deal with employees, because you do that. Your job as a manager, it's all about interaction, about human skills, about a kid, with his shoulders down and his hood up, walking along a corridor, something going on at home. You would instinctively sense that. The best managers are the best man managers. Ferguson, Klopp, Pep in a different way, Arteta in a different way, but absolutely, and particularly, I think, with you know far better than me, but particularly with this younger generation, they're far more, well, we saw Ronaldo crying last night, but they're far more of a sort of an emotional generation of actually talking about, I could talk about my kids, they're just talking generally, rather than the sort of bit more reserved generation, maybe like ours. So that's why the skills of a manager are just, that man management. But your skills, I mean, podcast, fantastic, but you could go and talk at London Business School. You could go and, well, it might help if you went and talked to some politicians and knocked some sense into them and said, I actually thought, and I actually was thinking about this pre-COVID, but I actually thought, and not because I'm just obsessed with football, but actually the best leaders, some of the most impressive leaders of this country, I think, have stepped out of the dressing rooms of this country.
Well, they weren't having parties. They weren't having parties during COVID, were they? So that's a start, I suppose.
There you go.
Do you think that's changing, Henry? One thing that me and Dave have discussed a lot is football's changing in the sense of, rather than a manager now, with the advent of a director of, obviously in Europe, there's been director of football for a long time. Now in England, nearly all of the 4 divisions have director of footballs, nearly all the clubs. So a lot of it, it's more of a head coach now. It's more of a coaching role. There's still that personal skill you need. But a lot of teams, and particularly I don't know if you found it at the Euros, but seem to be coached in a certain, a Pep style certain way. Do you think a lot of the games are sort of cancelling each other out? Again, me and David discussed it a lot. There's been a lot of games where you just look and it kind of follows the same pattern. One team, lot of possession. One team sat in. But it doesn't seem as much excitement in some of the games. Have you found that? Is that something you've witnessed?
I certainly found with the first 2 games of the group stages, teams are actually going for it a bit more, and there was a bit more adrenaline. You look at Georgia, you look at Turkey. Teams were actually, and England was sort of an outlier in terms of they weren't playing particularly well. Their build-up was a little bit more laborious. Actually, I would say for the first 2 rounds of games, it wasn't a particularly Pep style tournament. People were, there was almost sort of long balls being launched. I mean, in fact, look at England's 2 goals the other day to win the game against Slovakia. They emanated from set pieces. One of them was a Kyle Walker long throw. I can't remember the last time England did that. So yeah, it's been a mixture. I mean, one thing I'm slightly wary of is to take a snapshot and look. I would always get it from the office. The group stage has ended. Give us a definitive view on what's the state of football at the moment. What are the themes and the trends? Life from football doesn't completely work like that. You've got, different motivations, different styles, different managers, different collections of players, and what tactics suit them. I am struggling at the moment to work out what England's identity is, what their strategy is, apart from relying on some individual great moments. But in terms of I've actually really enjoyed this tournament in terms of teams going for it, the atmosphere. It's a proper football country. The trams don't work, the Wi-Fi doesn't work at times, but but actually it's kind of an old-fashioned tournament. I also like tournaments in one country because you can celebrate the culture of a country.
like that.
Yeah, I suppose it was just an observation I've had. There's not been too many standout performers so far. You know, all the games have been fairly. You know, there's no one obvious apart from maybe a Spain. So I suppose. You know, where you know from your observations, Henry, and I wouldn't want you to make a prediction, but you know, who's been the standout performer for you, and you know, where do you see the Euros heading?
Spain, and then you look at Austria and Switzerland. Everyone talks about England have got the easy side of the group, but Switzerland and Austria, obviously England play Switzerland next, potentially Austria, they get through into the semis. These are really well organised, well coached teams, and gone are the days where you could absolutely whack, you know, a so-called smaller country. I mean, you look at Slovenia and Slovakia. I think Slovakia have got a population of 5 million compared to England's 55. So, you know, there are dangers all over. But yeah, Spain have just been outstanding. But Spain have been mixing it up a bit. You know, they've got a bit of pace in there, and they're giving young kids a chance, and that was great to see. France have disappointed, but just you look at Deschamps. Deschamps finds a way. You know, he grinds out wins, and he gets criticism, and then he comes away with trophies. So, you know, there's some really exciting players out there. You look at Musiala. I've enjoyed watching Germany. I mean, I take your general point, but I love watching Germany. I just think I love that mix of discipline and the dynamism. They've got that element to them. And also from a selfish perspective, you always want hosts to go far into a competition because it just makes, I mean, like when Germany knocked Brazil out in the World Cup in the semi-finals, it was like the whole country was in mourning. It was like, we don't want, you know, even Christ the Redeemer just sort of, you know, went inside. It was just wretched. So anyway, you want Germany to do well till they meet England.
We can back that up because we played a friendly for Derby against Hoffenheim a good few years ago, and Nagelsmann was the manager. And I'll be honest with you, it was the first time I've ever had a game where, for large parts of it, I had no idea how to combat what they were doing. So unique. It was so different the way he tactically set the team up. It was a real eye-opener. And afterwards, we found a lot of their stuff still in the dressing room, a lot of the way they presented to the players. And it shaped a lot of how we would work now. You know, we speak about plagiarism all the time. You know, you look at someone he was a lot younger, but I just felt he was a lot better at what he was doing. And
in what sense?
Just they had a game plan on the wall. And honestly, back then it was like a goal kick. And he said, like, if the 9 does this, we do this. If they press with 2, we do this. And like the information that they'd given to the players, and it was almost American football, like that the players had to remember about 20 or 30 set moves. And it was like, wow. You know, you're looking and you're thinking, God, we have to be far more detailed than we are. And it challenged the way that we thought about the game, and we took a lot from that. So I'd be really interested to see if he can have, you know, the ultimate impact on that German national team and win it in the home nation.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about scrutiny. The scrutiny that the German players get. I mean, I always got on with Mesut Ozil because I speak German, and he gave me 2 fantastic interviews. And I say, it's really nice that you're doing this. And he said, yeah, but it's basically because I think he was getting battered in the German press at the time. And that was when he was on a run of winning German Footballer of the Year 6 times in 7 seasons while winning the World Cup. So, but you know, they have pressure on them. So Nagelsmann, you know, he may be going off and kissing his beautiful German TV reporter girlfriend, but the scrutiny from the media on him, and particularly the former players, you know, the England lot are getting upset about Gary Lineker using a swear word. God, they should hear sort of Mateus in full flight if he's ripping into them.
Well, Henry, I think that as we approach the end of the tournament, we're approaching the end of this time with you on the podcast, and we've really enjoyed it. It's been really enlightening to see it from your side of the fence, or your side of the white line, so to speak. So thanks very much for your time today. We've really enjoyed it.
But it's a privilege talking to you, and because I'm incredibly selfish, I knew that listening to you, I would get loads out of it. On your interviewing technique, also on your background, and I also now know, Gary, because it's the notes that I took down, the Continental Club Wednesday. So I know I'm going to go and ask your man about that. So look, every day is a learning day, and I wish you all the best with the podcast because it's pretty unique what you're doing, and that's what people want. They want unique podcasts, and you're providing that. I also think it's often good when you've got two like co-hosts. I think it just works really well. So I will be listening to all your pods with interest.
I'm not sure we actually have an interview technique, do we, Gary? I don't know what that
I
is
don't know.
yet.
First time I've realised that maybe we do. I don't know.
Have we?
We thought it was a very bad one.
No, it's also a slightly good cop, bad cop, or split strikers, Shearer and Sheringham style.
Don't
Exciting and pragmatic.
Yeah. One gets the glory, the other does the work.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Well, we know who that is. Yeah.
That's how it should be. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Brilliant. All right, I'm sorry about the Wi-Fi. I blame Rommel.
Don't worry, mate. That's the least of our problems.